This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Links to learn more about our guest today can be found in the show notes. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon.com. By joining on Patreon, you help keep Beyond the Big Screen sustainable and get many great benefits. Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more and sign up. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go Beyond the Big Screen.
And welcome back to another episode of Eyewitness History. We are continuing series, my collaboration with my friend and fellow Parthenon podcaster, Steve Guerra, host of Beyond the Big Screen. Steve, thanks for joining me again.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I can't wait. I'm really excited to talk about this movie.
Yeah, this will be fun. So, movie episode topic here is going to be The Raging Bull with the great Robert De Niro, directed by Martin Scorsese. What did you think about this movie, Steve?
Oh, I love this movie. It's full Martin Scorsese, even though in the kind of the grand scheme of things, it's earlier than a lot of his other big movies, but I think he really set the tone for all of his future movies. It's all there in Raging Bull. Everything that you come to love in all of his other movies, he's got it all there.
Yeah, he does. He sort of brought everything together in this movie. It was actually, Scorsese thought that it was going to be the last movie he would ever make because he was in the throes of a massive cocaine addiction at the time. And he decided to give this movie everything he had. And he certainly did that. Robert De Niro, masterclass performance. He won the Oscar for it. He put on, I think it was 40 pounds of fat to play an aging Jake LaMotta. Perhaps first, Steve, maybe I'll set us up by telling our listeners just who the heck Jake LaMotta is.
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, why we should care. So Jake LaMotta is a boxing legend. He was the middleweight champion at a time when the middleweight and the welterweight division, for that matter, was rife with talent. This would include the great Sugar Ray Robinson. We'll come back to that, I think. Carmen Basilio, Gene Fulmer, Marcel Cerdan. The list goes on and on. I really could stand here all day and give the names. But he was well known for his incredible chin and his determination. You could not knock the man down. He fought Sugar Ray Robinson 6 times. He won once, which is chronicled in the movie, as you know. And the "You Never Got Me Down" Ray that occurs in the movie really does happen. LaMotta was tough as nails, and Ray Robinson, for whatever it's worth to listeners, was an extremely hard puncher in his own right. In the Ring magazine commemoration, there's a photo of the perfect punch, and it was Sugar Ray Robinson in his knockout of Gene Fulmer with a picture-perfect left hook, which he's throwing coming backwards, which it's very difficult to throw a hard punch going backwards because you don't quite have the ground underneath you in the same way. And Ray Robinson was able to do it. And I just wanted to put a word in for the power punching aspect of Ray Robinson. So to have someone like him not be able to knock you out is no small thing.
I love this movie, and we'll definitely get into the boxing aspects of it. But I love that the movie was all in black and white, and there's so many black and white techniques in there, like with the water, where the water is dark because you wouldn't see the water in black and white. It might not look like anything. And There's just all these masterful touches in the black and white. It gives us this dreamlike quality. It feels like you're getting drawn into the 40s and the 50s in a way that I don't think would have happened if it had been done in color.
Yeah, I agree. Scorsese once again shows his genius on all things film, specifically lighting. A similar thing could be said in his movie, I think it was 2004, The Aviator, Leonardo DiCaprio as Howard Hughes. He has kind of a feral romp with the lighting portion of the movie and just gives us a very interesting sort of dreamlike lens through which to view the movie. And also getting back to Raging Bull, it also gave it a grittiness, which I very much admired. Yeah. It showed the grittiness of boxing at the time and certainly the grittiness of Jake LaMotta. So yeah, so far, nothing but praise for the movie for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It puts you into 1950s, the seedier side of New York City, boxing that's this golden age of boxing, but that has a kind of a seedier element to it. It completely envelops you in it. And I just think it was masterful. Plus the music, Scorsese music, it's always the perfect music for the perfect moment, and it elicit that emotional reaction that you're looking for. It's all there in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, most directors, if they get one masterpiece out of them over the course of 30, 40 years of directing, they should consider themselves lucky. Scorsese's basically had one in every decade in the last 50 years. I mean, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, The Departed, for which he finally, at long last, won his Oscar, which is about 30 years overdue, as far as I can tell. So, yeah.
Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Richard Lim's This American President and other great shows. Go to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more, and here is a quick word from our sponsors. As a boxer, maybe put Jake LaMotta, because I don't know. I think maybe in earlier times, Jake LaMotta might have been more of a household name. I don't know how much of a household name he'd be as an athlete today. What kind of boxer was he? Or how did he fit into the boxing milieu, you might say, of his time?
Yeah, milieu will do. Well, his style, we talked about grittiness a minute ago, and that seems to be the word of the day, I think. His style was what was known as a swarmer. And that is, he would come right at his opponent, and he would just throw everything but the kitchen sink at them. If he fought today, I don't think he'd be a champion, because there's so much of an emphasis now placed on talent. Skill plays a massive role. And of course it did back then as well, but you're finding much less sort of hard-nosed, come forward, throw everything you have guys. And those sorts of guys very rarely crack that upper echelon. I would cite like Arturo Gatti, whose names will hopefully be known to a few of our listeners. Extremely tough, durable fighter, not unlike a Jake LaMotta, but he never was an A-plus fighter. He was never like, use the names that everyone knows. He was never like a Floyd Mayweather. He was never like a Manny Pacquiao, right? So that's on that. And yeah, his style he was a swarmer, lots of energy, massive punching power, and he would just wear people down. He was a killer.
It's interesting. Jake LaMotta, they say in the movie that he didn't do a lot of training, really. And there's very few training montages. They don't talk much about his training. And I really think that he was just a guy who could punch and get punched a lot and wind up standing at the end. That's at least the vibe that I got from the movie. And, if people should definitely go back and listen to our last Ali episode, where we talk a lot about the science of boxing. There's so much more to boxing than a guy just jumping into the ring and swinging his arms around and hoping to connect. And I think that's maybe with that knowledge, when you see him getting beat by Sugar Ray Robinson, you can see he's probably getting beat technically by just a better fighter, a better strategic fighter.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe just to set that up a little bit for our listeners. So as I mentioned, Robinson and LaMotta fought 6 times. LaMotta only won once, but every single one of them was a hard-earned victory for Robinson. He never was given an easy night by LaMotta. Let's be very clear on that. So the actual fight was held on St. Valentine's Day, January 14th, 1951. And it's become known as boxing's version of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And the reason is, of course, the battering that Robinson gave LaMotta. And Robinson won by a technical knockout in the 13th round. And just for our listeners, a technical knockout is when the referee stops the fight or the corner stops the fight. It's not a knockout as such, but it amounts to it from the standpoint of the cards. Yeah.
One of the things that I was wondering about with the technicalities of the fighting, and maybe if it's something that changed in the rules, I know like nowadays you can't have where the round ends, and even if you're splayed out on the bottom of the canvas, that doesn't just end there. That it seemed like that happened a couple of times in LaMotta's fights in the movie where the guys just puddle on the ground. The bell rings for the end of the 3-minute round, and then they're able to scrape him up and recharge him to fight a little bit more.
Yeah, it depends kind of oftentimes on what decade you catch the sport. So when I interviewed Barry Tompkins, we talked about this a little bit. So the fights back then and through Ali, the championship fights lasted 15 rounds. Now this was changed, I think, around the early 80s from 15 rounds to 12 rounds because they wanted to address the issue of how do we deal with injuries in boxing. Now, over the course of 15 rounds, a fighter, even one that's well trained, and they have mouthpieces, don't forget, they will start to open their jaw to try and catch their breath to get more air, which perfectly sets them up to have their jaw broken, right? Mm-hmm. So that was how that was addressed. On the no fighting after the bell thing, yeah, back then you could absolutely do that, yeah. And I personally think that should never have been a rule. I strongly suspect that was put in as an insurance policy because this was at the time when the mob ran everything, and they wanted to have this sort of caveat, at least in the rules, in case their fighter was in trouble or if they wanted to invoke the rule somehow. Yeah, and then the other thing too, sorry to drone on, Steve, but the other thing too that I like to mention is the 3 knockdown rule. This is just as a technical aside, which I think is interesting. So in Muhammad Ali's day, for instance, if a fighter was knocked down 3 times in one round, it was automatically considered a knockout. So when Muhammad Ali was on his comeback trail, when he came back after getting his license, he fought Jerry Quarry. That was a TKO in the 3rd round after Quarry gets cut. And then he fought Oscar Bonavina, extremely tough and durable fighter, knocks him out in the 15th round because he knocks Bonavina down 3 times. Even though Bonavina was somewhat still lucid, he was not all there, but he could have gone on. And the fight was stopped then for that purpose. So it's very interesting at what decade you catch the sport and what rules are being imposed and when. And very last thing, and then I'll shut up. The 10-point must system, I believe, was still in effect even back in Jake LaMotta's day.
To me, the safety aspect, because you don't want somebody to get their clock cleaned so badly that they're really permanently damaged. They show the one fight, I believe it was with Tony Gennaro, who was a playboy and a pretty boy. And Jake thinks that his wife is hot for Tony Gennaro, and that really gets under his skin. And we'll talk more about Jake LaMotta's character. But so he gets Gennaro. I'm 99% sure it's Gennaro, but it's the pretty boy. Yep. He gets him on the ropes and he just disassembles him. And he literally disassembles this guy. His nose, I think they said that part of his nose fell off and he ain't pretty anymore. Is that something that is allowed anymore, where you can just get somebody on the ropes and just keep, when it's clearly that the person is not functioning, it's just that they can't physically fall down, that you can just keep striking them, and to the point where, I mean, this Gennaro character could have probably died potentially.
Yeah, so yes is the quick answer. You can punch and keep punching until the referee stops you. It's at the referee's discretion. There was a fight funny that we have Rocky on the docket to talk about. In Rocky 5, the actor that plays Tommy Gunn was a fighter named Tommy Morrison, who was himself a well-known contender. And he fought a guy named Merciless Ray Mercer, one of the most brutal knockouts I've ever seen in my life. Basically, he has Morrison hurt. Morrison doesn't go down. And so Mercer just tees off on him. Mercer got, I think, like 15 unanswered punches before the referee finally stopped the fight. The referee, in my opinion, should have been banned from boxing after that fight. So yes, the fighter can and should keep punching until he's told not to punch anymore. That's his job, right? But then the referee needs to do their job to make sure that, I'm a referee. I've reffed a couple fights, and one of the things they teach you in the referee, license camp is I'd rather stop 1,000 fights too early than one fight too late.
Mhm.
And I think that's dead right. So yeah, no, that was absolutely kosher. Everything LaMotta did there, certainly ill-intended to put it mildly, but completely above the board from a rule standpoint.
And so you as a boxer on the boxing side, you're just going to keep swinging until the person falls down or you're
Yeah.
told to stop. Is there an emotion? That's one thing that obviously with Jake LaMotta, there's an emotional when he's fighting. Again, we're going to get into his character and it'll put you into who Jake LaMotta is, but he's an emotional fighter. I think that he's angry when he's fighting. When you fight and have fought, was it just a sport to you? And obviously people get very emotional with sports, but when you're punching somebody else, do you get that adrenaline at that, like you're in an actual fight? Or do you kind of train that out so that you can be more analytical in your fight, which you need to be to win?
Yeah, great question. And if I'm being honest, that could be a whole other podcast talking about mindset and how you do it. You try to, for me, and I'll speak for myself, the goal for me was to not get excited. If you're excited and you get adrenaline pumping, it actually will tire you out quicker. If your muscles are tight from nerves, you'll get tired quicker. When I fought, I tried to fight without emotion. Part of it was easy because, as I mentioned in our last episode, my style was very much that of the dancer, the counterpuncher, the jabber. There was one fight in particular where I didn't do that. There was a guy I fought whose name was actually Cager. And I had heard through the grapevine that he had a vision that he was going to knock me out. That was, and then I heard that, and then my blood got up a little bit, and I was like, well, that's interesting because I also had a vision, and mine went a little differently. And then, yeah, I remember getting a little Jake LaMotta crazy. I don't know if we should leave this in, Steve. I broke a couple of his ribs. No, never mind. Hold on.
Okay.
I'm editing as I'm going in my head. And, I fought a lot more aggressively than I typically would. And then that was stopped on a technical knockout. So it's a weird psychological battle that fighters go through leading up to a fight. I mean, just imagine the quiet, the nerves in the dressing room before you're called out to go. That's a
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. Now, I'd love to talk about this is really the cast. It's kind of the Martin Scorsese holy trinity of Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and Frank Vincent. It's all there.
Yeah.
And each one of them really plays their role too. I think that Robert De Niro was you believe that he was a brute. And Jake LaMotta, I mean, by all accounts, he's a brute. He's a beast.
Yeah. And let's not forget the great Kathy Moriarty.
Yeah.
Who was phenomenal in it. Yeah, I mean, the acting was to the nines. As you point out, that's easy to understand when you have Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci holding the thing together.
I think, too, that Robert De Niro, he plays Jake LaMotta. Really, he's certainly not the hero. I wouldn't even say he's the anti-hero. He is the protagonist and the antagonist in this movie together. And I don't think you ever feel sorry for him. You loathe him, but you can't stop watching it. He's a train wreck.
Agreed on all points except one. There were two instances during the movie where I actually did feel sorry for him, which of course doesn't mean that I, think he's a good person or anything like that. But there's the bit where he is short on money and tears apart his championship belt for the jewels, if you remember, brings the jewels into the pawn shop. And the guy at the pawn shop says, these are worthless. And then he mentioned that he got them from the belt. And the guy was like, oh, if you brought in the belt, I could have given you like a ton of money. And I felt bad for him twice. Number one, that he, apparently had no regard for this thing that at one point obviously meant a great deal to him. Obviously. I mean, you literally put your life on the line for the thing, right? And then second, that he could have gotten some money that he needed but didn't.
I also think it comes across really perfectly by Robert De Niro. Jake LaMotta is not smart. He is not smart on the outside of the ring. He's not smart on the inside of the ring. And I think that really, he alienated everybody in his life, his wife, his brother, who would have done anything for him. And I think one of the most brutal scenes I've ever seen in a movie is when Jake confronts Joe, his brother, played by Joe Pesci, in Joe's house. They're just eating dinner, and he beats the living crap. Now, can you imagine that domestic situation, domestic violence? But then it's done by a professional boxer, and then he does a professional punch on his wife when she's just coming to stop him. And I think that it puts such a fine point that there was nothing redeemable about him. And even when Jake is at his lowest point and he's just doing these really cringy, weird club appearances as a comedian, and he sees his brother walking down the street and he goes and confronts him, and even then, it's just pathetic. And I love how they just leaned into that. They never tried to buff him up and make him look like, oh, he's trying to do better. He wasn't. That wasn't him.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I loved about the movie was that they didn't mind making him a tragic character. They didn't mind having someone that was unlikable and unredeemable, and certainly unredeemed in the movie. A lot of filmmakers, maybe someone who is less confident than Scorsese, would probably want to lean into this thing of like, let's try and patch him up a little bit at the end and make him, like I said, try to at least fit him into the role of the anti-hero, like you mentioned, which, by the way, I agree with you on. I don't think he certainly wasn't a protagonist, not really an anti-hero. He was just a human being, you know? I don't think it'd be right to contort him into one particular character profile. And that was one of the things that De Niro did phenomenally in the movie, and Scorsese did a great job of bringing that to bear.
I think also in this movie, the family dynamics, but also the one thing that it's filmed at a really interesting time, 1980. Jake LaMotta is in the prime of his life, really, at that point. He's not boxing anymore, but he's somewhat of a celebrity. And even when I saw this movie the first time, probably in the 90s, when I was a kid or something, Jake LaMotta was still a name. Now I think I wouldn't say he was a huge name, but you knew he was a boxer. You knew that he was successful. And then you watch the movie now, and I don't think most people would have that connection, but he lived a long, long time. Jake LaMotta died in late 2020.
Yeah.
96 years old. Jake LaMotta, his brother, was even older. He lived to be, or both Joey and Jake lived it well into their upper 90s. Joey LaMotta is the one who died in almost 2021, and Jake died in 2017.
Yeah, at the age of 95. It's incredible. And yeah, I mean, I guess the litmus test is, if not for the movie, would people still know the name Jake LaMotta if the movie didn't exist? And I think
probably not.
Probably not. No, because look, there were a couple LaMotta-esque fighters at the time fighting when he was fighting. I mentioned a few of them already. Carmen Basilio and Gene Fulmer, two great tough Italian fighters. Finding a tough boxer is easier to do than you might think. So that wouldn't necessarily qualify him to be a celebrity. It's certainly Scorsese, De Niro, and the movie, which for the record is made on the biography of Jake LaMotta called The Raging Bull, My Story. That catapulted Jake LaMotta into the sort of upper echelon of fame that we only reserve for celebrity fighters like a Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Leonard, and Tyson.
Yeah, I could go on and on about this movie. One question I have about the technical aspect of the fighting is somebody like Jake LaMotta, and maybe you fought somebody like this who just takes punch after punch after punch after punch, and they don't go down. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that type of fighter.
Yeah, it's annoying is what it is. Yes, I fought a guy, two in my head that I was thinking of as you were talking, that I threw everything at them, and these damn pit bulls would not go down. And it's never been demoralizing to me because, like I said, I was a points fighter. So I was perfectly happy staying on the end of my jab, getting on my bicycle, moving around the ring, and getting a points victory. Knockdowns were sort of inconsequential to me. So for me, there was no big whoop in fighting someone that could take my punches. Didn't really matter to me. But yeah, there was something slightly demoralizing about throwing across with everything you have and it not making a single dent. So that was something that occurred to me as you were talking. One thing I don't think we did yet, Steve, and we should do it now. So out of 5 boxing gloves, how many gloves would you give this movie?
Oh, I give this one 5 without even questioning it. How about you?
Yeah, you know what? I hate to be called an optimist here because I know in our last episode I gave Ali 5, but I'm giving Raging Bull 5 as well. I mean, it's it's going to be tough to argue with Scorsese and De Niro, you know.
I think when you have a movie like this that, for the most part, maybe you'll argue with this or you can point out where I'm wrong, but it gets the history pretty correct. It is great narrative. It's great film. And it gets the technicalities right too. I mean, I don't know how you can argue with all of that. It's film. It's the film technique is there. It tells a great story and it stays pretty historically accurate. It's tight. It's hard to argue that this is one of the greatest films of all time. Plus, it skyrocketed. It created a genre, basically. It was, even the meta is all there. Everything is there with this movie.
Yeah, no, I agree. As you say, I'll borrow your phrase. There's not much to argue with there. The technique was good. As I said in our last episode, the fact that it's something that actually happened and is real makes it a lot easier to look kindly on the technique used in the movie, or the boxing technique, I mean, which was all there. Believe me, once we get to Rocky, I'll have less kind things to say, I promise. So, we'll get there. So,
yeah. Tiptoeing up to Rocky.
Well, it's the one that I know all of our listeners will be wondering if we're going to cover it. And fear not, we will be. We just want to tease you guys first.
What could you point out? I mean, I'm really struggling to think of this, but I have to try and think of something. Is there something that just didn't resonate with you with the movie? Maybe with the technical aspect of the fighting, with anything. Is there something more you wanted out of it?
I so badly I'd like to think I could have an answer to any question you could possibly give me, Steve. But I got to tell you, finding a flaw in a Martin Scorsese movie, let alone his masterpiece, I don't think even I'm up to that task. It was all gravy for me.
Well, I have to say that it was bold to pick somebody to do that movie when they were still alive and relatively young at that point. Yeah. He grabbed it, the perfect point of somebody's life, of Jake LaMotta's life. He didn't, like we talked about with Ali, it didn't stretch out. It was the perfect narrative arc, and we didn't really have to leave it at anything else than that. We didn't have to go through this whole roller coaster of Jake LaMotta's life. We get it really perfectly encapsulated. And I think you can't argue with the only thing I would say is I just wanted more of it.
Yeah, boy, it's becoming a compliment train between the two of us. So all I have there is, I agree, man. Great movie, great directing, great acting, great story. They kept it tight. They covered the things that needed to be covered and no more. So I rest my opinion with those 5 boxing gloves out of 5 boxing gloves.
And we will be moving into some movies that we might not be so kind towards. So don't expect a lot of love fest. We're going to jump into the ring and throw some heavy punches at the next couple of stories.
Absolutely. Nope. And I'm looking forward to it. Steve Guerra, how can people find out about you, my friend?
The best place to go, well, you can find both of our podcasts at parthenonpodcast.com, along with other great shows like Scott Rank's History Unplugged, Richard Lim's This American President, James Early's Key Battles of American History, Chris Mowery's Vlogging Through History, which is also a YouTube channel. So you can find all of that and more along with Josh and I's show. Plus, you can find mine at A2Z History Page. How can we find your show beyond the places I've mentioned?
Yeah, well, you can find me on the podcast player of your choice. My podcast is Eyewitness History, where I interview people that were eyewitnesses to historical events. And this could be anything from a Holocaust survivor, or I also interviewed Frank DeAngelis, the principal of Columbine during the shooting, to more light stuff like Saturday Night Live writers and Wheatus, who did the song Teenage Dirtbag, which has sort of been revived as a meme recently. So all kinds of history. And you can find that, as I said, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. And you can also find Steve and I both on parthenonpodcast.com.
Yeah, check us out next time with more boxing movies. It was good talking to everybody. We'll see you again.
Take care.